All right, hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to my podcast or YouTube channel, whichever way you're taking this in. And I had an idea as I was recording the last podcast is, when I first started detailing, I was really doing fleet washing. I'm talking 10 cars a day wasn't an uncommon place for me to be. And then I had the idea of like, you know what? I don't think I've ever talked about my process on how to do 10 cars in a day, or what do you do when you go up and you have 5 cars sitting in front of you? What does that process actually look like? So in this podcast episode, I just want to talk about how I kind of systematize that. I know that style of detailing isn't for everyone. And in fact, if you're doing that style of detailing, I would recommend trying to get out of that style of detailing. It's more of a wholesale detailing kind of avenue. And honestly, it's extremely tough. It's extremely tough to make a profit. It's extremely tough on your body. And it's extremely tough to actually grow your business that way. I would highly suggest trying to make moves and pivot to doing a lot fewer cars, maybe 1 or 2 a day, unless you plan on growing your shop and all that. But as a mobile detailer, starting in 2008, the low-hanging fruit or the easiest work to get were these office building jobs. Now, during this time of COVID and all that, maybe it's not really popping like it used to be, but back in 2008, before all this was going on, that was the low-hanging fruit. That was the easy work to get. And so that was the work at 19 years old that came my way. So that was what I did. And so the problem is that if you spend an hour on each car or an hour and a half on each car, not only do you really not make any money doing that, that's an extremely long day to have 10 cars in front of you and be spending an hour to an hour and a half per car. So by default, I had to create a way or systems to get through these cars much quicker. And so that's why I think even with podcasts and videos and my business now, I really like to systematize stuff and be as efficient as possible. And I attribute a lot of that to those times when I really had to be efficient just because I wanted to get home at night and I didn't want to spend forever doing 10 cars and making $200, but it took me 10 hours to do it or 12 hours to do that. I saw very quickly how that wasn't going to be a very viable business. So one day I had, call it 8 cars in front of me. And it took me like all day. I was just getting started, had a friend come help me. It just was taking way too long. So I started to think about it as I was doing these cars of how I could become more efficient with doing cars. And since I was doing cars, the first thing that popped in my head was Henry Ford, right? And how Henry Ford created the assembly line and how that assembly line style work enabled him and the Ford Motor Company to really pump out cars, not only in an efficient manner, but also they were able to bring the cost of the car down while keeping the quality relatively the same because they had, one specific task at a time or one person doing one specific task. And then it would work its way down this whole assembly line. And by the time it worked its way all the way down the assembly line, it would be a finished product at the end. And so I was kind of mulling over that thought and that idea as I was doing these cars. And so I decided to try to implement what would be my strategy behind that. Obviously, I didn't have a whole crew working for me, so I couldn't have just one person vacuum and then one person would do the windows and then one person would only do the wheels, even though if you have that many people, that would be awesome. But for the most part, it was just me and me alone that had to get through these 8, 10 cars. I think my record was 21 cars solo in one day, in an 8-hour day. So what I decided to do was, again, it helped a lot to have deionized water. So I would usually start by washing the exterior of the cars I would do usually 2 or 3 at a time, depending on what the weather was like at the time. And that's where using wheel acid and kind of these more aggressive chemicals really came in handy too, because I could blow through these cars and some of the hacks and tricks that I know as well. But I would start by pre-rinsing, call it 2 cars. So my focus was really 2 to 3 cars at a time would kind of be my right in front of me focus. And the goal was to be able to do those 2 to 3 cars within an hour to an hour and a half, inside and outside. Talking basic washes though. So I would start by pre-rinsing all 3 cars. And then I would foam all 3 cars at the same exact time. So I wouldn't disconnect the foamer or the foam cannon at all. They would all get soaped up and foamed at the same time. This is where strategy also comes into play a little bit. of picking your spot in the parking lot perfectly. So, because if you could park in the shade versus the sun, you can kind of blow through these cars a little bit quicker. So they would all get foamed at the same time. They would all get hand washed with a mitt at the same time, these three. Then they would all get rinsed at the same time, these three cars. So then the exteriors were done, and because I was using, or not done, but they were almost there, and since I was using deionized water, I could let those cars, what I call drip dry. And when you let them drip dry, that's saving you the time from having to actually dry them yourself. So there's where you're cutting out a ton of time. And as those three cars were drip drying, I would either move to the next three cars, right? And then from there, move to the next three cars if I had that many cars at that time. But I would really pick a small section of cars, 2 or 3, and kind of do the whole process, or do the same process on each 3 of them. So they would all get rinsed, they would all get foamed, they would all get mitted, they'd all get rinsed again, and then I'd leave them. And then that would enable me to either move on to the next set of cars or move on to the interiors. So then what I would do, if we just take those 3 cars, for example, they would all get their interior wipe downs. So I'd take my brush and my towel and my cleaner, and boom, they would all get wipe downs, right? All 3 of them. And then from there, they would all get vacuumed. And then after they got vacuumed, I usually would hit the jams, and then boom, the interiors were done. But you get the idea of this assembly line process. I wasn't taking out my vacuum to do 1 car, putting it away, going and moving that car. I was vacuuming 3 cars at one time. And then the same thing came for when I would be done with the interiors, and then I go to the outsides. By that time, they're probably dry or mostly dry. So then I do the windows, and I do the windows on all the cars before I go on to the next part of the car. And then after I do the windows, all the cars get a quick detail spray. And so, and then all the cars get tire dressing, and all the cars get a touch up on the wheels. Hopefully your cleaners and stuff do a lot of the work on the rims themselves, so you don't have to worry about that too much. And again, we're talking about car washes, so there's not a lot of scrubbing on the tires, not a lot of that. These aren't details, these are car washes. And so, but I remember days where it's like, oh my gosh, I got 32 tires to to dress ahead of me, or 16 tires, and that's a lot of motion. And so you start to develop kind of hacks and ways to get through that faster as well. Spray dressings and letting them, spray it and let it dwell and come back to it later. There's a lot of that when you get into fleet detailing or fleet washing. It's a lot of like kind of just micro cleaning, and then coming back and kind of touching it up later, or using heavier chemicals to kind of, so you're not sitting there scrubbing all that. But again, I as I recorded a different podcast, and I kind of wanted to, or I was talking about something else rather, and then I had this idea of like, man, I've never talked about like fleet washing and how I kind of developed an assembly line for car washing to make it really efficient, and then make it profitable because you made it efficient. And so, again, that's what I wanted to share on this podcast episode. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm doing something new and feel a little bit out of my element, even though I'm comfortable in front of the camera. But all these podcasts are now video podcasts as well. So if you want to see the video format, you could go over to my YouTube channel. It's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all those places too. But if you want to see me behind the microphone and in front of the camera, you could go over to my YouTube channel and subscribe over there. And I will catch you guys on the next podcast episode. See ya.